It is not just a shipwreck. It is a question that has never been answered. How could a double-decker relic of the Soviet era, advertised as a gateway to a nostalgic past, collapse in the middle of the Volga River in just 3 minutes? Why did a system designed to defy the mighty currents of Russia surrender to a set of open windows and a sharp turn? And more importantly, why did 122 souls, mostly women and children, become the first victims of the very confidence they trusted? But that is only the surface. Behind the moment the ship rolled onto its side in the dark water lies another story less told, but equally dangerous, about criminal negligence, corporate greed, and a chain of small errors merging into history. Why did it all happen in July 2011? And what actually killed the Bulgaria River? The storm, or the human element? Stay tuned, because the truth about the sinking of the Bulgaria is unlike any story you know. The Volga River does not flow like water. It flows like history. In the height of the Russian summer, the surface is a mirror of endless blue stretching so wide that from the center, the banks look like thin green pencil lines drawn by a distant god. It is a place of profound silence and ancient beauty. A waterway that has carried the czars, the Soviets, and now the tourists. On July 10, 2011, the Bulgaria cut through this stillness with the grace of a grand dame. Built in 1955 in the shipyards of Czechoslovakia, she was not a modern plastic yacht. She was a vessel of steel and character, a double-decker memory of a bygone era. To step onto her deck was to step back into a time of slower rhythms. There was no aggressive hum of modern turbines, only the deep rhythmic thumping of an old diesel heart. The passengers, over 200 of them, felt lucky. They were not just on a transport, they were on a holiday. The smell of brewing tea and sweet tobacco drifted from the promenade decks. Couples leaned against the railings watching the sun glitter on the wake, while below them the dining halls buzzed with the clatter of silverware and the murmur of relaxed conversation. It was a Sunday. The worries of the land had been left at the dock in Bulgar. Here on the water, there was only the breeze and the promise of a return to Kazan. But the summer of 2011 was hot. A suffocating humid heat hung over the river, turning the steel interior of the ship into an oven. The Bulgaria, in her vintage charm, lacked the modern lung of air conditioning. The cabins were stifling. To breathe, the passengers and crew did the only thing they could. They opened the round portholes. All along the lower deck, dozens of heavy glass eyes were unlatched and swung open, leaving gaping holes in the ship's steel skin just inches above the rushing water. Nobody saw this as a danger. It was simply a way to let the breeze in. It felt good. It felt like relief. Inside the music room on the upper deck, the atmosphere was electric with joy. This was the heart of the ship for the voyage's youngest travelers. Dozens of children were gathered there playing games, their laughter bouncing off the wooden paneling. Parents dropped them off, grateful for a moment of peace, confident that their little ones were safe in the center of the large, sturdy vessel. The music room was full of life. A sanctuary of innocence, where the only concern was who would win the next game. The parents walking away did not know that the music room was a steel cage located at the highest point of the ship, a place where gravity would strike first and hardest when the world turned upside down. As the afternoon wore on, the captain navigated the vessel with the casual confidence of routine. But the Bulgaria was tired. She was listing slightly to the starboard side, a persistent nagging lean that had become part of her personality. The crew had compensated for it, ignored it, or learned to live with it. She was running on one engine, limping slightly, But she was a survivor of 56 years. She had weathered storms and ice. Why would today be any different? The sky began to bruise. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, promising a summer squall, a common temper tantrum of the Volga. The wind picked up, whipping the flags and cooling the sweaty faces of the passengers on the deck. It felt refreshing. It felt like part of the adventure. In the dining room, lunch was being cleared. The mood remained light. A few plates slid a little too far to the right, clinking against the table edges. The passengers adjusted their cups and smiled at the tilt, unaware that the heavy fuel tanks below were empty and the sewage tanks were full, creating a fatal imbalance that was silently pulling the ship toward the water's surface. The storm was not a monster yet. It was just weather. The Bulgaria turned her nose to navigate a bend, preparing to face the wind. The music played on. The windows remained open. The river waited. We are now in the present tense. The autopsy of the past ends here. Now we are on the deck. The wind slams against the Bulgaria's starboard side. It is a solid wall of air. The captain, fighting the gust, orders a sharp turn to the left. He intends to straighten the bow into the waves, a standard maneuver. But the Bulgaria does not straighten. The ship leans. It is not a gentle sway. It is a sickening lurch. The heavy, unbalanced hull rolls to the right, pushed by the wind and pulled by gravity. And this is the moment the trap springs. Down on the lower deck, the river rises to meet the open windows. It does not splash in. It invades. Dozens of open portholes transform instantly into high-pressure hoses. The Volga River, cold and brown, roars into the cabins at hundreds of gallons per second. The passengers in their bunks do not even have time to stand up before the water is at their waists, pinning them against the walls. The tilt increases. 10 degrees, 15 degrees, 20. In the dining room, the world disintegrates. Tables slide like hockey pucks. Dishes shatter in a deafening cacophony of ceramic and glass. People grab at tablecloths, at pillars, at each other, but there is no friction. The floor is now a slide dropping directly into the flooding starboard wall. For one cruel second, the lights flicker and stay on. A woman laughs nervously, thinking it is just a rough wave. Then the lights die. Darkness swallows the ship. Absolute suffocating blackness. The only sound is the roar of rushing water and the terrifying groan of steel twisting under pressure. The Bulgaria is no longer a ship. She is a falling stone. In the music room on the top deck, the horror is absolute. The floor angles sharply. The heavy piano tears loose from its moorings, crashing through the furniture. The children are thrown together into a pile of limbs in terror against the lower wall. The door, the only exit, is suddenly high above them, an impossible climb up a slippery, tilting mountain. The water isn't here yet, but the angle tells the body that the end is coming. The engine room floods. The silence of the machines is louder than the storm. The ship has lost its heart. It has been 60 seconds since the turn. On the outer deck, passengers scramble like ants on a sinking leaf. They claw at the railings, climbing the vertical wooden slats as the river rises to swallow the promenade. There is no time to launch the lifeboats. The canisters are rusted, the ropes are tangled, and the angle is too steep. A man tries to release a raft. The mechanism is seized by years of paint and neglect. He screams at the metal, but the metal does not care. The Bulgaria rolls completely onto her side. The funnel smashes into the water, hissing as the hot exhaust pipe meets the cold river. Inside, the water fills the corridors, ceiling to floor. It is a torrent of mud, debris, and oil. Those trapped in the cabins are in a washing machine of death. They claw at the ceiling, searching for air pockets that are rapidly disappearing. 2 minutes. The ship begins its final plunge. The stern rises slightly, then follows the weight. The suction is immense. It pulls everything down. Chairs, life vests people. 3 minutes. The surface of the Volga closes over the mast. The screaming stops, replaced by the churning of bubbles and the hiss of escaping air. The river flattens out, resuming its endless, indifferent flow. Where a steel fortress stood 3 minutes ago, there is now only a patch of oil and the bobbing heads of the few who manage to jump. They tread water in the silence, waiting for help. And then the final betrayal arrives. 2 cargo ships appear on the horizon, the Arbat and the Dunayski. They are massive, slow, and safe. The survivors in the water wave their hands, shouting, choking on diesel fumes. They see the ships. The crews of the ships see them, but the propellers do not stop. The cargo ships churn past their wakes, washing over the drowning faces, fading into the distance without slowing down. The silence that followed the screaming was heavy, broken only by the slapping of the river against the empty life rafts. The Bulgaria was gone, resting on her side 20 meters beneath the surface, shrouded in the thick, silty darkness of the Volga. But the event was not over. Now began the slow, grinding machinery of the aftermath. For the next 2 weeks, the river became a theater of industrial awe. It was no longer a waterway, it was a crime scene. 2 massive floating cranes, the Moguchi and the Storm, arrived like steel titans. They were monsters of engineering designed to lift bridges and move mountains, now tasked with a far more delicate operation, raising a steel coffin without breaking it. The scale of the resurrection was staggering. The Bulgaria weighed nearly 800 tons, but filled with water and mud, she was an immovable object anchored to the riverbed by immense suction. The engineers calculated the tension of the steel cables with mathematical precision. One wrong move, one snapped line, and the hull would tear apart, scattering the evidence and the bodies into the current forever. Before the cranes could pull, the divers had to descend. The underwater world was a place of zero visibility. The divers moved by touch, crawling like blind insects over the cold steel skin of the wreck. They weren't just salvage experts. They were witnesses entering a frozen moment in time. The temperature dropped. The pressure built. They reached the promenade deck, then the dining hall. Inside the scene was a chaotic suspension of gravity. Tables were bolted to the floor, but chairs formed driftwood piles against the ceiling. A clock on the wall of the captain's bridge had stopped at exactly 1:58 p.m., ticking for an audience of ghosts. But the true horror awaited them in the stern. The divers made their way to the music room. This was the target. Reports said dozens of children were there. The door was jammed, held shut by the pressure of the water and the twisted frame. It took heavy tools to pry it open. When the light of the dive torches finally pierced the gloom of the music room, the hardened salvage men wept in their masks. It was a tomb of perfect preservation. The room was full. The children wearing their bright summer clothes were huddled together. They had not scattered. In the final seconds, as the world tilted, they had instinctively grabbed onto one another. A Game Boy still floated near the ceiling, its screen black drifting in the silent current. The operation to lift the ship took days of agonizingly slow work. The cables tightened, groaning under the strain. The water churned as the Bulgaria refused to leave the mud. It was a battle between the machines above and the physics below. Slowly, inch by painful inch, the white superstructure broke the surface. It was a grotesque sight. The ship was coated in brown slime, dripping water like a beast emerging from a swamp. As the pumps began to drain the hull, the river poured out of the very wounds that had killed her. And there, visible to the investigators standing on the salvage barges, was the undeniable proof. Along the lower deck, the portholes were still open. They hadn't been smashed by debris. They hadn't been blown out by pressure. They were neatly, intentionally latched in the open position. The ship had not been murdered by the storm. She had been murdered by the heat. The forensic investigation that followed was an autopsy of a system, not just a ship. The Bulgaria was revealed to be a ghost ship, a vessel that existed legally only on paper. The engines were a disaster. Of the two main engines, the port side engine had been dead before the ship even left the dock. The Bulgaria had started her voyage effectively crippled, fighting the current with only one working propeller. This explained the list. This explained why she couldn't turn into the wind fast enough. The electrical systems were a nest of rotten wiring. The pumps were insufficient. But the rot went deeper than the steel. The investigators found the paperwork. The license to carry passengers had been forged. The safety inspections had been bribed. The maximum capacity of the ship was 120 passengers, yet she was carrying 201. There were not enough life vests. There were not enough rafts. The crew was untrained, a motley collection of freelancers who didn't know the emergency protocols. The owner of the tour company, a woman who operated from a small office, had prioritized profit over physics. She knew the engine was broken. She knew the ship was listing. But the summer season was short, and the tickets were sold. On her desk, investigators found a calculator and a stack of receipts, but no maintenance logs. The betrayal was total. The passengers had walked onto the Bulgaria seeing a charming vintage cruiser. They didn't see the bribe money that allowed it to sail. They didn't see the disconnected alarms. They didn't see that the steel beneath their feet was a lie. As the water was finally pumped out and the Bulgaria sat dry in the floating dock, she looked small. It was hard to believe this rusting metal box had claimed so many lives. Inside the cabins, life jackets were found, still strapped into their storage racks, useless, inaccessible, pristine. The music room was emptied. The toys were collected. The ship was stripped. The resurrection was complete, but nothing could be fixed. The Bulgaria was not salvaged to sail again. She was raised only to answer the question, why? And the answer was terrifyingly simple. She sank because nobody cared enough to stop her. The Volga River today looks exactly as it did on July 10, 2011. The water is the same deep, indifferent blue. The banks are still lined with green trees. The surface has no memory. It has swallowed the screams, the oil, and the grief covering them with a blanket of silt that will never be lifted. The wreck of the Bulgaria was eventually towed to shallow water and cut into pieces. The steel was melted down, recycled into new forms, perhaps a bridge, perhaps a car, perhaps another ship. The physical evidence is gone. The captains of the passing ships who did not stop were fined. The tour operator was sent to prison. The ledger was balanced by the courts, but the echo remains. The tragedy of the Bulgaria was not an accident of nature. It was a collaborative murder committed by corruption and complacency. It proved that the most dangerous thing on the water is not a storm and it is not a rock. It is the belief that it will be fine. We often look at these rusted machines and think they are the problem. We blame the old engines, the weak rivets, the lack of air conditioning. But machines are innocent. They only obey the laws of physics. If you open a window at the waterline, the river will come in. If you overload a ship, gravity will pull it down. The machine does not negotiate. The true monster is the human decision to look at a rotting hull and see a profit margin. It is the signature on a forged safety certificate. It is the captain who turns the wheel without checking the balance. As you sit here, safe in your home, remember this. The Bulgaria is not just a Russian story. She is a warning. Every time we ignore a warning light because it is expensive to fix, every time we skip a safety check because we are in a rush, we are opening a porthole. The river is always waiting. It is patient, and it is always hungry. History is not just dates and numbers. It is the collective memory of our species. Thank you for taking the time to remember these events with us. If you have a story or an event you believe deserves to be told, leave it in the comments. We are listening.